Hey guys, welcome to Neighbor Stories with JusRead. Today we're diving into some incredible stories about overcoming the toughest neighbor disputes. Our story is titled, I Paid Off $200,000 of Homeowner Association Debt for 10 Families in 48 Hours. The story starts like this. I never thought I'd become some kind of neighborhood hero. Heck, for most of my life I was just a regular guy trying to make ends meet like everyone else. But sometimes life throws you a curveball, and before you know it, you're standing at the plate with a chance to hit it out of the park. My name's Mike, and this is the story of how I ended up paying off $200,000 worth of homeowner association debt for 10 families in my community in just 48 hours. It sounds crazy, I know. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be doing something like this, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are. It all started about 6 months ago when I moved into Sunnyside Estates, a modest suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The houses weren't anything fancy, mostly 3-bedroom ranches built in the 70s and 80s, but the tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns gave the place a cozy, family-friendly vibe. I'd just gone through a tough divorce and was looking for a fresh start. Sunnyside seemed like the perfect place to begin this new chapter of my life. Little did I know what I was getting myself into. The first few weeks were pretty quiet. I was focused on unpacking and settling in, so I didn't pay much attention to my neighbors or the goings-on in the community. But then one Saturday morning, as I was out front mowing my lawn, I noticed a commotion down the street. There was a moving truck parked in front of the Johnsons' house, a nice family with 2 young kids who lived a few doors down. But something didn't seem right. Instead of loading boxes onto the truck, they appeared to be unloading their belongings onto the front lawn. Curious, I shut off my mower and walked over to see what was going on. As I got closer, I could see Mrs. Johnson, Sarah, I think her name was, sitting on the curb, her face buried in her hands. Her husband Tom was arguing with a stern-looking man in a suit, while their kids huddled together on the porch, looking scared and confused. Hey, everything okay here? I called out as I approached. Tom turned to me, his face a mix of anger and despair. No, everything is not okay, he said, his voice cracking. We're being evicted. Can you believe it? Over some bullcrap homeowner association fees. The man in the suit, who I assumed was some kind of lawyer or official, cleared his throat. Sir, I've explained this to you already. Your family has accrued over $20,000 in unpaid homeowner association dues and fines. The association has no choice but to proceed with foreclosure. I was stunned. $20,000? How is that even possible? Sarah looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy from crying. We fell behind on our dues a couple years ago when Tom lost his job, she explained. We thought we'd be able to catch up, but then they started adding on all these late fees and fines. Before we knew it, the debt had spiraled out of control. Tom nodded grimly. We've been trying to work something out with the homeowner association board for months, but they won't budge. They say they need to set an example to discourage other homeowners from falling behind. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sure, I knew homeowner associations could be strict, but forcing a family out of their home over unpaid dues? That seemed extreme, to say the least. There's got to be something we can do, I said, more to myself than anyone else. Have you tried talking to a lawyer? Tom let out a bitter laugh. With what money? We've already drained our savings trying to keep up with these payments. We can barely afford to put food on the table, let alone hire an attorney. As I stood there watching this family's life being dismantled before my eyes, something inside me snapped. I couldn't just stand by and let this happen. Without really thinking it through, I turned to the official and said, what if I paid their debt? Right now? In full? The man looked at me skeptically. Sir, we're talking about over $20,000 here. Are you prepared to cover that amount? I swallowed hard. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I could swing it, but I knew I had to try. Yes, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I can pay it. Just give me an hour to get the money together. The Johnsons stared at me in disbelief. Sarah stood up, shaking her head. We can't let you do that, she said. It's too much. We couldn't possibly pay you back. Don't worry about paying me back, I told her. Let's just focus on keeping you in your home for now. We can figure out the rest later. With that, I hurried back to my house and started making some calls. I had some savings and investments I could liquidate quickly, and I figured I could put the rest on my credit cards if I had to. It wasn't ideal, but I couldn't stand the thought of that family losing everything over some ridiculous homeowner association fees. An hour later, I returned with a cashier's check for $22,500, the full amount of the Johnsons' debt plus a little extra just to be safe. The official seemed surprised but accepted the payment, calling off the eviction on the spot. The relief on the Johnsons' faces was indescribable. Sarah hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, while Tom just kept shaking my hand and thanking me over and over. Their kids were jumping up and down, cheering now that they knew they wouldn't have to leave their home. As word of what happened spread through the neighborhood, other families started coming forward with similar stories. It turned out the Johnsons weren't the only ones struggling with crushing homeowner association debt. Over the next few days, I heard from no fewer than 9 other households facing similar situations. There was the elderly couple down the block who'd fallen behind on their dues after one of them had a stroke. The single mom working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over her kids' heads. The young couple who'd bought their first home, only to find themselves drowning in unexpected homeowner association fees and fines. Each story broke my heart a little more. These weren't deadbeats trying to game the system. They were good people who'd fallen on hard times, and were now at risk of losing everything thanks to an overzealous homeowner association board. I knew I had to do something. But I also knew that simply paying off everyone's debts wasn't a long-term solution. We needed to address the root of the problem, the homeowner association itself. So I called a meeting. Word spread quickly, and soon my living room was packed with concerned neighbors. As I looked around at all the worried faces, I realized just how widespread this issue had become. "All right, folks," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I think it's clear we've got a serious problem on our hands. But before we can fix it, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Can someone give me a rundown of how our homeowner association operates?" A middle-aged woman named Linda raised her hand. "I used to be on the board," she said. "Stepped down a few years ago when things started getting intense." "Intense? How?" I asked. Linda sighed. "Well, it started small. Stricter enforcement of existing rules, higher fines for violations. But then they started adding new regulations left and right. Before long, you could barely sneeze without getting hit with some kind of fee." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Tom Johnson spoke up next. "And don't forget about the special assessments," he added. "Seems like every other month they're charging us for some new improvement project." As more people shared their experiences, a clear pattern emerged. Our homeowner association had gone from a reasonable organization meant to maintain property values, to an oppressive regime nickel and diming residents at every turn. "Okay," I said once everyone had had a chance to speak, "so we know what the problem is. Now we need to figure out how to fix it. Any ideas?" The room fell silent for a moment. Then Sarah Johnson cleared her throat. What if we dissolve the homeowner association entirely?" she suggested hesitantly. A chorus of voices rose in response, some in support, others skeptical. "Is that even possible? But what about our property values? Wouldn't that just create a whole new set of problems?" I held up my hands for quiet. "It's definitely an option worth considering," I said. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we make any big decisions, we need more information. Does anyone here have any legal expertise?" A man in the back of the room raised his hand. "I'm not a lawyer," he said, "but I work in real estate. I might be able to help navigate some of the legal aspects." "Great," I nodded. "What's your name?" "Dave," he replied. "Dave Martinez?" "All right, Dave," I said. "What can you tell us about our options here?" Dave thought for a moment before speaking. "Well, dissolving an homeowner association isn't impossible, but it can be complicated. You'd need a supermajority of homeowners to agree, and there could be financial implications depending on how the homeowner association is structured." He paused, then continued. "Another option might be to try and change the homeowner association from within. Get new people elected to the board who will push for more reasonable policies." This suggestion sparked another round of discussion. Some people were eager to run for board positions themselves, while others were more hesitant. "The current board members won't give up their power easily," one woman pointed out. "They've got a good thing going with all these fees and fines." She had a point. We were up against a well-entrenched group that benefited from the status quo. Changing things wouldn't be easy. As the debate continued, an idea started forming in my mind. It was risky, potentially even crazy, but it just might work. "Listen up, everyone," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the chatter. "I think I might have a plan, but I'm going to need your help, and your trust." All eyes turned to me as I laid out my proposal. It was audacious, to say the least, but as I explained each step, I could see the spark of hope igniting in my neighbor's eyes. The plan was this: over the next 48 hours, I would pay off the homeowner association debts of the 10 most financially distressed families in our community, a total of about $200,000. This would give us a solid voting bloc to challenge the current board's policies. Meanwhile, we'd form a committee to draft a new set of homeowner association bylaws, ones that were fair, reasonable, and focused on actually improving our community rather than just extracting money from residents. Once we had our new bylaws ready, we'd call for a special election. With the support of the families whose debts I'd paid off, plus others who were fed up with the current regime, we'd have a good shot at ousting the old board and implementing our reforms. "I know it sounds crazy," I admitted, as I finished outlining the plan. "And I know I'm asking a lot of you all, but I truly believe this is our best shot at fixing things." The room was quiet for a moment as everyone processed what I'd just proposed. Then, slowly, people started nodding and murmuring their agreement. "I'm in," Tom Johnson said, standing up. "After what you did for my family, Mike, I'd follow you into battle." Others quickly joined in, volunteering for various roles in our makeshift revolution. Dave offered to help draft the new bylaws. while Linda said she'd use her insider knowledge to help us navigate the homeowner association's rules for calling a special election. As the meeting broke up and people started heading home, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. For the first time in a long while, it felt like things might actually change for the better. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity. I spent most of the first day on the phone with my bank and financial advisors, liquidating assets and arranging transfers. It wasn't easy. I had to cash out some long-term investments at a loss and max out a couple of credit cards, but by the end of the day, I had the $200,000 ready to go. Meanwhile, Dave and a few others were hard at work researching homeowner association law and drafting our new bylaws. Linda was digging through old homeowner association documents, looking for any loopholes or procedures we could use to our advantage. The second day was all about execution. I met with each of the 10 families we'd identified as being in the most financial distress, explained our plan, and offered to pay off their homeowner association debts in full. The reactions ranged from disbelief to tears of joy, but every single family agreed to support our efforts to reform the homeowner association. As I handed over check after check to the homeowner association office, much to the visible confusion of the staff, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Sure, I was taking a big financial hit, but seeing the relief on my neighbors' faces made it all worth it. By the time the 48 hours were up, we had accomplished more than I ever thought possible. 10 families were now debt-free and firmly in our corner. We had a solid draft of new bylaws that emphasized fairness and community involvement. And thanks to Linda's detective work, we had found a clause in the homeowner association charter that allowed for a special election if petitioned by 30% of homeowners, a number we now easily exceeded. The next few weeks were intense as we prepared for the election. The current board, realizing their power was threatened, launched an aggressive campaign to maintain control. They sent out flyers warning of plummeting property values if the homeowner association was weakened, and even tried to intimidate some of our supporters. But we stood firm. We countered their scare tactics with facts and a positive vision for our community's future. We went door to door, explaining our plan to neighbors who hadn't been at the initial meeting. Slowly but surely, we built a coalition of support. The night of the election arrived, and the community center was packed. As the votes were counted, you could cut the tension with a knife. But when the final tally was announced, the room erupted in cheers. We had won, and by a landslide. In the days that followed, we moved quickly to implement our new bylaws. Excessive fines were eliminated, and a more reasonable fee structure was put in place. We established a community assistance fund to help residents who fell on hard times, ensuring that no one would ever again face losing their home over homeowner association debt. As for me, well, my bank account was significantly lighter, but my heart was full. Seeing families like the Johnsons able to sleep easy at night, knowing their homes were secure, that was worth more than any amount of money. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were still challenges to face and details to iron out, but for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of true community in Sunnyside Estates. Neighbors were looking out for each other, coming together to solve problems instead of just complaining about them. One evening, about a month after the election, I was out for a walk when I ran into Sarah Johnson. She was pushing her youngest on the swing in the neighborhood park, looking happier and more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Mike," she called out, waving me over. "I was hoping I'd run into you." As I approached, she gave me a warm smile. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said, "for everything you've done for us, for all of us." I shrugged, feeling a bit embarrassed by her gratitude. "I just did what anyone would do," I said. Sarah shook her head. "No, you didn't," she insisted. "What you did was extraordinary. You didn't just save our homes, you brought our community together. You gave us hope." As I stood there in the fading evening light, watching kids play and neighbors chat amicably on nearby benches, I realized Sarah was right. This was more than just about paying off some debts or changing some rules. We had fundamentally transformed our neighborhood into a place where people looked out for each other, where everyone had a voice. "You know," I said, thinking out loud, "maybe this could be a model for other communities. There must be homeowner associations all over the country with similar problems." Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. We could share our story, offer advice to other neighborhoods dealing with overbearing homeowner associations." We spent the next hour brainstorming ideas for how to spread our message. By the time I headed home, my mind was buzzing with possibilities. This journey had started with me just trying to help out a single family in need, but it had grown into something much bigger. As I walked up my driveway, I paused to look around at the quiet, peaceful street. Sunnyside Estates wasn't perfect. No place is, but it was home. And now, thanks to a little bit of courage and a whole lot of community spirit, it was a home we could all be proud of. I may have paid off $200,000 of homeowner association debt in 48 hours, but the real value of what we'd achieved was immeasurable. We had created a template for how communities could come together, stand up to injustice, and create positive change. Over the next few months, our story started to spread. At first, it was just local news, a feel-good piece about a neighborhood coming together. But soon, we started getting calls from other communities facing similar issues with their homeowner associations. They wanted to know how we'd done it, if we could offer any advice. Before I knew it, I was spending my weekends traveling to nearby towns, speaking at community centers and living rooms packed with frustrated homeowners. I'd tell our story, lay out the steps we'd taken, and offer encouragement. It wasn't always easy, every situation was unique, and there were no guaranteed solutions. But seeing the hope in people's eyes as they realized they weren't powerless, that they could fight back, that made it all worthwhile. Back home, things were going well. Our new homeowner association board, made up of a diverse group of neighbors including Tom Johnson and Linda, was doing a great job. They'd implemented a transparent budgeting process, drastically reduced fees, and started several community improvement projects that people actually wanted. One Saturday morning, about 6 months after our big election, I was out in my front yard planting some flowers when Dave Martinez pulled up in his car. "Hey Mike," he called out as he walked over. "Got a minute to chat?" "Sure thing," I replied, brushing the dirt off my hands. "What's up?" Dave looked excited. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Remember how we were talking about spreading our message to other communities?" I nodded, curious where this was going. "Well," Dave continued, "I've been in touch with some people at the state level. They're interested in our story." "Really interested?" "They're talking about using our model to draft new legislation regulating homeowner associations statewide." I was stunned. "Are you serious? That's incredible." Dave grinned. "It gets better. They want us to testify at a hearing next month, share our experiences, explain how our new system works. What do you say? Ready to take this fight to the next level?" For a moment, I hesitated. This was bigger than anything I'd imagined when I first stepped in to help the Johnsons. But then I thought about all the families out there facing the same struggles we had, and I knew what I had to do. "Count me in," I said firmly. The next few weeks were a flurry of preparation. Dave and I, along with a few other neighbors, spent countless hours poring over documents, refining our arguments, and practicing our testimonies. We wanted to be ready for anything. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. As we walked into the imposing government building, I couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. This was a far cry from our neighborhood meetings in my living room. But as soon as I started speaking, telling our story to the attentive panel of legislators, my nerves melted away. I talked about the families who'd nearly lost their homes, the sense of powerlessness we'd all felt, and the way our community had come together to create change. Dave followed with a more technical presentation, outlining the legal challenges we'd faced and the solutions we'd implemented. Other neighbors shared their personal experiences, painting a vivid picture of life before and after our homeowner association reforms. The questions from the panel were tough but fair. They wanted to know about potential downsides, how our model might work in different types of communities, what safeguards we'd put in place to prevent abuse. We answered as honestly and thoroughly as we could. Yes, there had been challenges. No, our solution might not work exactly the same way everywhere. But the core principles, fairness, transparency, community involvement, those could be applied universally. As the hearing wrapped up, one of the legislators leaned forward in her seat. "Mr. Davidson," she said, addressing me, "I want to thank you and your neighbors for your testimony today. It's rare that we get to hear from people who have not just identified a problem, but actually solved it at the ground level. You've given us a lot to think about." Leaving the building that day, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. We'd done our best to make our case, but only time would tell if it would lead to real change. Months passed. Life in Sunnyside Estates continued to improve. Our new community-focused approach was paying dividends in ways we hadn't even anticipated. Neighbors were forming book clubs and organizing block parties. There was a thriving community garden where the old, barely used tennis courts had been. People were outside more, talking to each other, looking out for one another. Then, almost a year to the day after our testimony, we got the news we'd been hoping for. The state legislature had passed a comprehensive homeowner association reform bill, incorporating many of the ideas and principles we'd advocated for. It wasn't perfect, legislation never is, but it was a huge step in the right direction. The day the governor signed the bill into law, we threw a massive celebration in Sunnyside Estates. The whole neighborhood turned out, along with reporters from local and even some national news outlets. As I stood there, watching kids run around with balloons and adults chatting happily over plates of potluck food, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come. Sarah Johnson came up to me, a wide smile on her face. "Can you believe it?" she said, gesturing around at the festivities. "All of this started because you decided to help us that day. You changed everything, Mike." I shook my head. "We all changed everything," I corrected her. "I may have gotten the ball rolling, but it was the whole community coming together that made the real difference." As the party wound down and I headed home, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year and a half. When I'd first moved to Sunnyside Estates, I was just looking for a quiet place to start over after my divorce. I never could have imagined I'd end up leading a neighborhood revolution, let alone helping to change state law. But that's the funny thing about life, isn't it? You never know when you'll be called to step up to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to say this isn't right and do something about it. I thought about the $200,000 I'd spent paying off those homeowner association debts. It had been a huge amount of money, and there were times I'd worried about the financial impact on my own future. But looking at what we'd accomplished, the families we'd helped, the community we'd built, the changes we'd inspired, I knew it had been worth every penny. As I turned onto my street, I saw Tom Johnson out walking his dog. He waved, and I waved back, remembering that day when I'd first seen his family being evicted. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Stepping into my house, I noticed a letter had been slipped under my door. Curious, I opened it to find a handwritten note. Dear Mike, I know you've always said you don't want to be paid back for what you did for us, but I hope you'll accept this small token of our appreciation. It's not much, but it's a start. More importantly, I want you to know that what you did, it wasn't just about the money. You showed us that one person really can make a difference. You inspired us to stand up for ourselves and for each other. You helped us turn a neighborhood into a true community. Thank you, from all of us. The Johnsons, and the rest of Sunnyside Estates, enclosed with the note was a check. It wasn't for the full amount I'd paid, not even close, but that didn't matter. What mattered was what it represented, a community coming together, looking out for each other, paying it forward. As I sat down at my kitchen table, check in hand, I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. This was never about the money. It was about doing what was right, about standing up for your neighbors, about building something bigger than yourself. I may have paid off $200,000 of homeowner association debt in 48 hours, but what I got in return was worth so much more. I got a community, I got a purpose, and I got a reminder of the incredible things that can happen when people come together to create change. Looking out my window at the quiet, friendly street of Sunnyside Estates, I smiled. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, I knew we'd face them together, because that's what real neighbors do. And guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. If you enjoyed this epic neighbor showdown, please smash that like button. Comment with some house emojis to show your support, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks a lot, and I will see you again tomorrow with another amazing story.